Hey there, Duke fans. Welcome to episode 438. Yeah, 438 of these. If you've been listening for a while, we love you. Episode 438 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. I am Jason Evans coming at you on a Thursday in the middle of August. And you would ordinarily think, what on earth are the guys going to talk about on a Thursday in the middle of August? Well, we got something special for you today. If you are a data geek the way we are, prepare to get your geek on. Before we get our geek on, though, let's introduce the entire crew. Like I said, I'm Jason. The dude over there is Donald. The other guy is Sam. Donald, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited about what we have in store today. So I'm just going to stop right there so we can get on with it.
Yeah, let's get to it. No apologies to girls that we called boys or anything like that in this episode. Sam Klein. Sam, you're in a new place today, I think.
Yeah, I'm joining from Chicago today, and I am also excited to get this show on the road.
Without any further ado, then, we're going to bring in a name that you have heard multiple times on this podcast. Usually we just refer to him, by like his shortened name, Ken Pom. But we're joined by the one, the only, the guru of the advanced analytics, Ken Pomeroy. Ken, thanks for coming on the DBR podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. It's great to do a little off-season chatting, and especially with a fan base that has always been pretty kind to my work. So great to be on. Absolutely.
Yeah, we are subscribers to your website. We constantly talk about your stats, the advanced metrics, the tempo, tempo free efficiency and all that other kind of stuff that you do for us. I'm gonna go ahead and let Sam get started with all this. Or wait, am I letting Sam or Donald? No, Sam, you're going to get started. So Sam gets started, and we'll each come in at various times, but take it away.
Thank you, Jason. And Ken, like Jason said, we are, of course, huge fans. Listeners to the show have heard us reference your stats. When we do, during the season, when we do previews of any team that Duke is coming up to play next, we usually start by just saying, all right, here's what the tempo free stats say about this team and how they match up with Duke. And most of the conversation kind of comes from there. So before we get into the questions, thank you so much for making it much easier for us to do our jobs. And hopefully we've driven a little bit more traffic to your site in return.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that. And you're doing a great job of pumping up my ego right now. So I'm going to have to work hard to keep it in check the rest of the day. But
all right, let's get into it then. So I know that you are an alum of two schools with I'd call them big time basketball programs in Virginia Tech and Wyoming. You're also a faculty member at University of Utah. So the first thing we need to know is, where does your college basketball rooting interest lie?
Yeah, well, it's a very, very high praise to say that Virginia Tech and Wyoming are basketball. What did you say? Did you say basketball powers?
They've both been in the NCAA tournament like multiple times in the last few years, right? So relative to the whole scope of Division I.
Wyoming
not compared to Duke. Not compared to Duke.
Yeah.
I didn't go there, right?
Except for one day in the ACC tournament in March, but we don't have to go there. But as far as my allegiances are with the two schools that I have degrees from. So even though I would not personally consider them basketball powers, they do, certainly Virginia Tech gets to an NCAA tournament once every 4 or 5 years, and been really pleased with where they've gone, under Mike Young, obviously. And Wyoming is kind of having a little bit of a resurgence right now. Has some pretty good teams, although they've had some really horrible teams in the recent past. But anyway, that's where my allegiance lies. I should just correct the record that I'm no longer a faculty member at the University of Utah. Not because of anything I did wrong there, but because just basketball has kind of taken over my life. So I have no allegiance to them, although living here locally in Utah, I do like it when the local teams do well. So that is the extent of my rooting interest there.
Excellent. All right, let's go back in time and talk a little bit about the invention of kenpom.com and the whole little universe that you have built around your database. So when did that light bulb click on that you knew that you needed to start gathering all the data to produce the tempo free stats that we now all read on a almost daily basis during the season?
Yeah, it was kind of a curiosity that developed early 2000s. I was still kind of a baseball fan at that point, and again, I'm not a baseball fan really anymore, but not because of my hatred of baseball or anything like that, just because basketball took over my life. But there was a lot of analytical work going on in baseball that was just really fascinating. The kind of the amateur blogging industry was taking off at that point. Book Moneyball came out, and so that was really interesting stuff. And college basketball was my favorite sport. It was a tremendous challenge to follow it with so many teams all across the country that you might not have heard of. So that's really where the motivation got started, and certainly inspired by the work of Dean Oliver, who wrote a book called Basketball on Paper back in 2002 or something. John Hollinger was starting to do his work for the NBA then, and producing a Pro Basketball Prospectus. So there was a lot of material out there that was coming out about basketball, but not necessarily about college basketball. And so there just seemed to be an opportunity to do some work there to gather all this data and put it on a website. And if for nothing else, entertain myself for figuring out which teams were doing kind of weird stuff across the country.
You're pretty forward about when you make major changes to how the model works on your site, at least for subscribers. How often are you making tweaks to the model, or at this point, is it kind of set in a way that you can just let the thing run?
Yeah, it's as time has gone on and my name has gotten more established and my ratings have gotten used more and more, there's not as much incentive for me to make major changes to the ratings. To the extent that I do make changes now, it is mostly been tweaking the influence of the preseason ratings, how those are weighted during the season, because those have actually proved to be pretty effective early in the season of making predictions. So that's been the major, to the extent that there are major changes, that's been the major change that I've made in recent years. But as far as everything else, it's if I make a change to the ratings now, it's the questions you have to ask are do I go back in time and make changes to all the previous ratings, using an updated algorithm? On the one hand, that seems like you should do that. But on the other hand, it's I remember when my team was number one in 2013, and now you've just erased history, and now they were no longer number one on January 23rd or whatever. So most of the time I've kind of just leaned on just trying to be consistent. And obviously if better systems develop, and I'm sure there are better systems out there, that's just the way it goes. My system's pretty solid and people know how it works pretty much. And so I'm good with kind of just for the most part, keeping it consistent going forward.
All of your compatriots in the baseball world are very happy to tweak the WAR algorithm every year. So you've got at least more consistency in your old ratings than they do.
Yeah, I think that's actually, kind of an advantage. People look at my site maybe and they're oh, what are all these numbers? This is really complicated. But most of the numbers on my site are percentages or, one number divided by another or something like that. I mean, offensive rating is kind of complicated, but you kind of know what it means. It's easy to explain to people what it means. Whereas it's easy to explain what WAR means, I guess. But, the calculations for it is something you just assume is correct. And I mean, it's fine. I trust it as a data person, but I can see why fans who are not analytically inclined might have more trouble buying into a WAR for baseball than they would for an offensive rating for basketball.
So you've been publishing the ratings for, I think, over 20 years now. There have been a lot of changes in the way that the game is played. Have any of those trends, more three-pointers, more emphasis on switching defense, that kind of thing, has any of that affected the way that you either read the ratings that you're producing or made you think about ways that you might change the algorithm to value different parts of the game differently?
Yeah. So, I mean, clearly the game has changed. And I think that's something that, if you're a member of the site and you go back and look at a team page from, 2004 or something, you immediately notice that 3-point shooting rates were much lower then. And same 3-point shooting rate ranked a lot higher in 2004 than it would now. So I just try to provide that context kind of in a very plain way, what were the D1 averages each season, so people can kind of understand the numbers in that context. In terms of, I guess, interpreting those numbers in any deeper sense, nothing really jumps out at me in a way that makes sense. I mean, the game has changed. It's gotten more offensive. Having more shooters on the floor at all times just gives the offense an advantage that I think, the defense to some extent is at the mercy of the offense, certainly more than it was 20 years ago. So I think, to me, the numbers just provide that kind of backdrop on maybe understanding the game better. I don't think it maybe necessarily goes the other way where you have to revisit the numbers in a way that, hey, the game's different, so maybe we should be looking at different numbers. I don't think there's like necessarily a huge change in that approach.
And how fair is it when you look at the rankings and the subsequent like efficiencies from one year to compare a single year to another year from the past? Because I know that like on our show, we're not usually talking about old teams from other programs, but we're always arguing about which of these Duke teams would beat these other Duke teams. So how much do you think we can use your ratings to justify our answers in those debates?
Yeah, that's kind of a pet peeve of mine, when people like go too far in that direction, or they'll say, hey, this team's rating from this year is higher than this team's rating from 12 years ago, so they're a better team. Like every year is a little bit different. The fact that there are more teams now too, I think affects that. Like it allows teams to maybe have higher ratings now than they would have had 15 years ago, because all the ratings are relative to the mean of Division I. So if there's more teams, like the mean is going to be, now it's the 180th best team, whereas 20 years ago it was the 150th best team. So naturally, if you're comparing the mean to 180 teams below you, like your rating can be a little bit higher than it used to be. So there's a lot of little issues like that. I mean, I think with some care, like, and you can make some judgments. Like, I mean, clearly, like, you go back, I think like 2008 Kansas might have the highest rating ever. Maybe Kentucky 2012 was second. I don't even keep track of these things in my head, because like I said, I don't think it's a great exercise, but I think when there are large differences, that's where you can make the case. If there are small differences, then I don't think I would go there. And then also just comparing offenses and defenses, like, 15, 20 years ago, offenses weren't as good as they are now. So if you're comparing an offense from 2002 to 2022, like naturally, like the 2022 offense has a big advantage just based on the current environment. So those things get a little bit touchy to me as well. Like you really need to understand the context of how the game is played, I think, to make definitive comparisons, if that's the game you want to play.
Absolutely. And are there any elements, I know you've mentioned on the blog that there are certain elements that are either you don't have in the model right now or that are basically impossible to capture, but are there any elements that you are trying to add to the model, injuries or other factors that you wish had more granularity in that, in those metrics?
Yeah, injuries are tough because, somebody gets hurt, like, we have enough data now where we can probably start handling that. But then what do you do like when that player comes back, or when you don't know if the player's coming back? Like, theoretically the ratings for like right now, like what's going to happen tonight? And if this player is returning, then do I flip the rating so that we go back to like the rating when that player was playing or not? That's just a tough issue that I basically just decided to ignore for simplicity. But as far as like I guess the one obsession is really just handling like, I use scoring margin as a proxy for like how much more dominant was this team than its opponent on a particular night. And obviously that can be misleading on a game level. I think over the course of a full season, like those kind of things even out for 99% of teams, but on a game level, it doesn't. And I think trying to figure out how to handle that better is something that I would like to do. Not all 30-point wins are the same. You obviously like to cut out garbage time in a lot of cases, but sometimes garbage time actually helps the rating. So it gets to be kind of tricky, and I haven't found a way that I really like that's just better than raw scoring margin. But clearly there are instances where you can bring up where like, hey, this game, something goofy happened in the last 2 minutes where a team, got outscored 16-0 and they were up 28 points and they end up winning by 12. And like, that wasn't really, they were actually way more dominant in that game. And so handling those things, I think, is doable, and it would require a lot of work and a lot of effort, but it's something I would like to eventually do.
Yep. When we review Duke games, I can't tell you how many times we'll say like Duke will win the game by 10 points and we'll say that was a great 10-point victory or that was like a terrible 10-point victory, just depending on the way the game went. I want to hand it over to Donald, who has a few more questions about sort of how things work today.
Thanks. And Ken, again, I echo everyone when I say this is awesome that you're on here and being able to chat with you about this. We've talked a little bit about the model, and I want to kind of translate it into today's college basketball game, beginning with the transfer portal, because that trend has been players transferring earlier, more often. How does that affect the quality of your metrics? Because, I mean, when you think about it, for example, I don't think any of us saw Alondas Williams developing into an all ACC player last year based on transferring.
Yeah. Alondas Williams, Jake LaRavia, like all sorts of good stuff happening at Wake Forest last year. But it's so I think for like, by the end of the season, it's fine. Like you would know who these teams are, and it's just as good as it's always been in February, March. I think it's the early season ratings, the preseason ratings, where it becomes a challenge. Obviously, transfers have more influence now. I do have a way to handle that. I think in general, honestly, like the transfer portal probably should help preseason ratings because I'm less reliant on trying to guess on players who have no Division I experience and how they're going to impact their team. Whereas now, like there's always going to be surprises like Alondas Williams, but for the most part, you should be able to model like, hey, this guy's coming from this program, he's up transferring or he's transferring, to the same type of program. What kind of impact is he going to have on a team? And so when it comes to that kind of stuff, I think in general, like the transfer portal should help. I'm not saying that it is helping my ratings necessarily, but I haven't noticed like a huge difference. Like every year we get, early, like late November, early December, people will talk about my ratings and they'll be like, well, even Ken says like the early ratings aren't that good, or whatever. And I'm like, well, when have I ever said that? Like, actually, they're pretty good. Like if you look at the average like error in my like predictions in like late November, early December compared to like February, it's like, 0.2 or 0.3 points worse or something like that per game. Like it's not something you'd really notice. So
I think even the guys who do polls say that on the whole, we're pretty good at predicting these things, even with limited data.
Yeah. The preseason poll in college basketball is supposed to be the single best predictor of who will win the national title.
Yeah. The preseason poll is really valuable. Like I actually do value the human polls, like preseason wise. Once the games start playing, it's not that useful. But I was just looking at the data and like, so last year in December, the average error on my predictions was 8.9 points in terms of like predicting the scoring margin of a game, and then in March and April or in February, it was 8.6. So, 0.3 of a point difference basically. So it does help to have that additional information as we go on in the season, but like the preseason ratings are, they're pretty useful. Like they're a little bit more useful than probably people would like to think, but we're actually like, whether it's the pollsters themselves or computers, like we're pretty good at kind of judging talent based on where it's coming from transfer wise, how good the team was last year, those kind of things.
I mean, you just talked about the preseason rankings and kind of how, you shape it, but how complicated does it get? Because like for us, we feel it's even complicated for Duke fans because every year we have so many freshmen coming in, so many transfers, yada, yada, yada. But like, how is it for you when you're having to deal with 358 Division I programs and all of the, transfers back and forth, people leaving, people coming in?
Yeah. So I think if you like are an expert on a team, like you guys should probably, if you are doing like an honest assessment of Duke basketball heading into the season, you probably are going to beat my preseason rating of Duke, like in the long run. But the advantage I have is that I have data for 300, this year, 362 teams, and you're not going to beat my prediction for Sam Houston State because you probably don't know anything about Sam Houston State. I mean, you can do some research, but you just don't have that like feel for who they recruited or the players coming back or the transfers or whatever. And so I'm
totally researching Sam Houston State now.
Yeah.
I'm all over it.
So my database approach is generally going to beat you. I mean, it's really the advantage of data in general is that it can see everything. It has data for all the teams. And so it's going to beat you in aggregate. But if you're an expert on a specific team, it's probably not going to beat you.
I would actually tell you that we are not good at predicting what Duke is going to do because we get completely wrapped up in whatever the news of the week or the news of the month is.
And our emotions. You can't
So,
divorce your emotions. Yeah.
We care too much.
Yeah. I mean, there's a point to be made for that. And like every year I kind of get a kick out of it. Usually there's like a thread on Reddit about my preseason ratings and, there's hundreds of like responses on where I'm wrong. And so it's great to like go back after the year's over and look back at that thread and see like where people were right and where people were wrong. And it's, it's like about 50-50, people are so sure like their team is going to outperform my ratings or whatever, or some of their rivals going to underperform my ratings. And sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. And I do think experts can beat my ratings on the teams that they're familiar with, but I think in general, like for the whole list of 362, like it puts, 99% of teams in at least the right neighborhood for a starting point, which is, basically the goal before the season. Like, it's either have no ratings or have teams in the right neighborhood. And like, I think it does a pretty good job putting teams in the right neighborhood.
Ken, is there a team that you feel like, especially maybe recently that you feel like, gosh, I seem to always overrate those guys or underrate those guys?
Well, I don't know. Maybe you have somebody in mind. I mean,
I really don't. I really don't.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like a few years ago, I'd be talking about Virginia. I feel like Virginia, was kind of consistently better than people thought they were. But lately, that hasn't been the case. So,
right. Yeah. I mean, Virginia would come up. Obviously, the year, what was 2018, they lost to UMBC. Like that year, you might say, oh man, they were really overrated. Why were they number one? But I defy somebody to come up with like a worthy system or worthy rating system that didn't have them number one during the regular season. They had the best regular season of any team, like clearly, like they couldn't beat Duke, but everybody else they beat and usually beat badly. And so yeah, I think Virginia's okay. The one team actually does come to mind is Virginia Tech, probably. Like, I'm surprised they don't get more of a reputation. I usually have them ranked pretty high. Obviously last year had them ranked really high during the regular season, started off horribly in ACC play and then finally salvaged it and finally validated it in the ACC tournament. But that's a team that I'm, spoiler alert, I'm going to have ranked probably higher in my preseason ratings than, anybody else will have ranked. And so we'll see how that turns out. But that's the one team that obviously, because I'm familiar with, like, kind of comes to mind. I'm like, oh, wow, nobody's really paying attention to Virginia Tech. What's going on? I mean, I
was going to ask, is that by design? Is that where you kind of say, put a little home cooking in the algorithm for Virginia Tech?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, that's the thing. Like, if you're a fan of a team, would I cook the books for them or against them? You kind of maybe don't want to have super high expectations heading into the season. So yeah, I will say, like, when I look at my preseason ratings, I usually do pretty poorly at like trying to figure out where I've screwed up. There's a lot of times, like, like last year, like Iowa's a good case. Like, they were ranked in my top 25. And I think that, I don't think they got a single vote in the AP poll. And that was a team. Then you looked at their lineup, you're like, well, like Keegan Murray's probably going to be awesome, but they don't really have any help. Like, how's this team going to be top 25? And then they turned out to be pretty good, tournament performance notwithstanding. But, so I usually have the same issue too, of like trying to figure out which teams are overrated and underrated based on my ratings. Like, usually I feel like I'm about 50-50 on trying to pick those out.
So we talked about your rating system, and in this college basketball analytics world, there's quite a few that everyone knows about: Torvik, BPI, Sagarin. There was the RPI, back in the day, that's kind of evolved. I mean, first of all, what do you think about your competition? And also, how do you feel that the NCAA, when they kind of retooled their selection criteria, they added your metrics to that criteria? Like, how does that feel?
It's it's a little uncomfortable to be a part of the selection criteria. I feel like they kind of duplicated my ratings with the net as it is. So it's like, they've used
the net is all over the place, by the way.
Yeah,
I didn't even mention them, but
you're
certainly
so much better. You're so much better than the net. It's not even funny.
Well, early in the season it is, because the net doesn't have preseason ratings, but by the end of the season, like, all these ratings converge on each other, right? Like, you have, 30 games of data. And so there's not much difference in these ratings. So, it's kind of the dirty little secret, but yeah, I'm a little uncomfortable with it being part of the NCAA's list of metrics. I don't think it really comes into play a whole lot. So I'm not too concerned about it. Like I said, I think the net has duplicated my system enough that, like, whatever influence my system has, it's like by proxy through the net. So yeah, I don't know what else to say. I'm a little uncomfortable about it, but but I obviously could ask them to remove it, and I do think about like, this isn't worth the time anymore. Like, I have enough brand recognition that I don't need it. I don't need it in their system. They never really asked me for permission to put it in the system. So there's that. But again, I don't think it really plays much of a role. So
can I press on this really quick?
Yeah. Press
what
away.
Makes you uncomfortable about it? Is it that there's so many other problems with the NCAA that you just don't want to be affiliated, or that it's weird as a fan and as sort of an outside observer now being sort of an input
thrown into the room? Yeah.
Because I would love to be in the room. Duke, number one
as a fly on the wall.
But yeah,
if I ever get invited to be in the room, I will have you be my emissary, Jason.
You're here first, folks. Mark that down.
Yeah, I'm not too comfortable with the process itself, right? Like, it's just a very nebulous process. It doesn't have like super well defined criteria, and could be a lot better. And, I'm certainly like willing to like offer advice to the NCAA, and have done so in the past. So I'm not like anti NCAA in that respect. I do think like the people that are making this process are generally like well-intentioned and trying to get it right. They just don't have the background that people like I have. So, so that kind of like causes some problems. But so what makes me uncomfortable about it? What really makes me uncomfortable about it? Here's a good story like for you. Like 20 years ago, I used to put the RPI on my site, right? Like Jerry Palm was doing the RPI and he eventually went to a pay site. And I was like, man, this is like just an easy formula to compute. I'm just going to put it on my site. And I did it and got a little bit of like attention for doing that. But then I started like getting like I got a call from an SEC coach when I was working at my old day job. He just like cold called me and was like, hey, why is like my rival like 20 spots ahead of me in the RPI? And I'm like, dude, like, I don't need to be answering these questions. So I got away from the RPI and did my own thing. And now I'm starting to get calls from coaches like, well, why is my rival 20 spots ahead of me in your system? Like, what's going on? We just won our game, like we just beat this like sorry team by 50 points. Like, how come we didn't move up? And I just don't need to answer these questions either, like it's just overhead that it's not the reason I got into doing this. And so that's part of it. Like, it's part of it when fans get wrapped up in like, is their team moving up 1 or 2 spots in my system? Like after a certain win, it's like, man, you guys should be concerned about other things besides that. So that's really like probably the main source of my angst, is that I just don't need that kind of like I love the attention. I love the people use my work, but I think sometimes it's the attention is for the wrong reasons. If you're worried about whether your team is moving up 1 or 2 spots after a win.
Wait, I want to be really clear. Do you actually get phone calls from coaches who are upset that they didn't move up because they beat some lousy, 320 sub team? Really?
Maybe that's not the best example, but I do get calls from coaches who are like, what's going on with my team's rating? There was a coach last year who called me and, his team got off to a good start and they started off really low in my preseason ratings and they were moving up slowly but they didn't move up that much. And coach was really frustrated about that. And I had to explain to him, hey, I got preseason ratings. My system's designed to be predictive. It's trying to predict your next game. So it's not going to overreact to like starts and stuff. But if you keep playing well, you'll keep moving up. And, we'll just see where you are at the end of the year. As it turned out, like, I think they ended up like, at the time he called me, I think they ended up like maybe like 5 or 10 spots lower at the end of the season than where they were. So like, it turned out the system was doing a pretty good job. But yes, I do get calls from coaches complaining about their ratings. That is a fact. Yep.
The system never forgets, and it feels like it's always levels out at the end, right? So
well, I don't forget about those calls. So I'm always checking like, well, I'm going to follow this team and see what happens, and hopefully the coaches too, because I hope they like understand like how the system works now. Like, it's not designed to like reward put a team 10th after a 5-0 start when they're beating teams that are ranked in the 150s or something.
So we've told you how we use your rating system. You've told us how some coaches apparently use your rating system. How does Ken Pomeroy use his rating system? Do you like watch games and track using your site or any of your analytics that you've put together, or do you just kind of set it and get it?
I mean, I use it. I don't use the ratings as much as I use like the underlying data. I'm kind of looking out for like teams that are changing their system, changing their style, new coaches in a situation, like what kind of style they're using, Carolina last year, like, when Hubert Davis took over, like they just decided to like not be a offensive rebounding like juggernaut like they weren't at Roy Williams for year after year. And so like that was pretty interesting to me. The ratings themselves are like less interesting to me, although they are interesting in terms of like Houston like being really highly rated last year while not having like a single quality win and people just ragging on Houston all year. And it's like, well, yeah, I kind of wonder, is Houston the real deal or not? And like, well, more often than not, when you're ranked high in my ratings, you are the real deal. And I think they kind of proved that in the tournament. So, so it's for cases like that, it's like really the teams that are just like defying like the public opinion are the teams that I'm really interested in and kind of start to gravitate towards following a little more closely during the season.
Now, before I turn it over to Jason, as we kind of wrap up this segment of the college basketball today, I know, Kim, I know your normal site takes up a lot of your time, especially during basketball season. But are there any other sports analytics projects that you're working on?
Oh, it's funny you should ask that. No, the only other sport I've really gotten into is curling analytics, which probably doesn't have a big audience for not a big crossover audience with Duke basketball, let's say. Maybe if we were talking Minnesota basketball or something.
I give the curling site a click every so often.
Yeah.
Just because I'm like, maybe today's the day.
I love curling. So you're speaking my language. Go right ahead.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that's the only other sport I've really gotten into. And it's mainly because it's like a sport that I'm interested in. I play a lot. But also like there was very little other work going on with curling analytics, like, yeah, I'm tempted to like get into college football. Like that's like kind of a natural, like next project to get into. I feel like college football analytics are lacking, certainly from what I watch on TV. Like the broadcasters, like, sound like they don't know anything about like modern analytics. And I know there's some work going on there. Bill Connolly, most notably at ESPN, does a lot of work with that, but it would just be a huge project. And I know a huge time sink, and basketball is already a time sink, and curling now is also a time sink. So,
and do you want, I mean, you've already upset all these uneducated basketball coaches and media members. Do you want to do the whole project over again with football? Like what's even the point?
You think coaches are calling you now?
Yeah. Oh, I know, but it would be kind of fun to like just, shove it in people's faces when, coaches are punting on 4th and 1 from, the opponent's 35 or whatever, like, which seems to happen once or twice a week. It would be fun to shed more light on that. I know people have shed light on that, but I would love to join in that partnership. So that is very tempting. Just the stats that are cited by broadcasters during games are just, it's the same thing it was in basketball 20 years ago, where it's like, yeah, this team, their pass defense is 3rd in the country, or whatever. And it turns out they played like, 3 like option teams or something. They played all the service academies to start the season, which are never passing. So it's like, well, their pass defense is probably not that good, guys. Like maybe it's like schedule based. So whenever I hear something like that, I get tempted to jump in, but the reality is I do not have the time or energy now to do that.
Okay, Ken, Sam and Donald have gone. I'm going to take it, and we're going to talk at least a little bit about Duke. And I know that that's going to be a challenge for you. As you pointed out, we certainly care more and know more about the team than you do, but I do want, I want to get a little bit of your perspective on the Blue Devils. We always seem to do well in your rankings, especially, even in years, I would say when the fans are kind of down on the program, sometimes I'll look at the Ken Pom rankings. I'm like, hey, we're not as bad off as people seem to think. What do you attribute that to? Is that just like, hey, Coach K is a great coach and he figures it out, or what is it?
Yeah, I mean, that certainly was like the trademark of the Coach K era, was they never had a bad year. Like even, 2021 was not a great year, but even you look at the ratings, they were pretty good. Like
they were number 36. They were number 36 that year. It's the worst they've been in the history of your rankings. Yeah,
that's the worst. Yeah, it's the worst.
The worst year is number 36. Most schools would kill for that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there were obviously like extenuating circumstances that if you want to throw out that year, you can throw it out. So I don't know why that is, but yeah, it's like I think you can chalk it up to coaching. Certainly like that's one trademark of the Coach K era. The other trademark is that like a lot of coaches, you can like anticipate their style. We talked about like Roy Williams and how like, every year they were great at offensive rebounding, but you look at like the list of seasons for Coach K and it's like, there's just like different style after different style. He's jumping around from year to year. So he certainly was like one of the most flexible coaches in terms of like adapting to personnel. And I mean, I would assume that's like a contribution to like them just being like consistently, a top 10 team almost every single year in my rating. So
Ken, can we take that clip and transport it back like 20 years? Because what you just said was totally not the Coach K reputation pre like the JJ Redick years. And I feel like that's totally changed in the era of your metrics.
Yeah. So so like what was the criticism, that he was too inconsistent or not, or sticking to one style?
That he was
that he was always playing the same style, that like Duke always played the same defensive game, that they had this. Well, Duke was also, I think, probably hotter on 3-point shooting in like the early 2000s before it really blew up. JJ being like a big example of that, but there were plenty of guys on those good teams around.
2001 was
everybody in that 2001 except for Carlos Boozer, everyone was shooting threes, and that was in an era where that was unheard of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they took over 40% of their shots from threes, which like even now would be like kind of noteworthy for a team like vying for a national title. But then it was like absurd, and it's odd. Like like the team has kind of like gone against the grain since then. Like really since the JJ Redick years, like they haven't shot as many threes while everybody else is shooting more threes. But yeah, I mean that's super unusual how they've changed styles.
We touched on this earlier. The challenge in having a preseason ranking for Duke, because there's so many freshmen. I mean, like looking at this year's Duke team, and I know you haven't released at least I don't think you've released your preseason rankings yet. How close are you on them?
Well, I mean, I have them, but I have traditionally not released them until maybe late October-ish, mid to late October. I do that, for multiple reasons. One is there's still going to be like personnel changes from some teams that we just can't anticipate. Sure. Probably another like coaching change that we can't anticipate, which goes into the ratings. But also like there's just so much like information out there now. There's so much groupthink. People just come to like a consensus that is a little bit of annoying, and so I kind of like rebel against that and don't add to the possibility of people like looking at my ratings and thinking they're like some sort of gold standard. And we'll just wait until the preseason poll comes out. Then I'll release the ratings.
Will you give us a little hint? What do you think of Duke this year?
Yeah, my hint is that like Duke will probably be like lower in my preseason ratings than in any other preseason rating you see. Not that they're going to be ranked terribly, but one of the factors is coaching. And obviously, like I think most Duke fans probably look at Jon Scheyer as like a sure bet to be a really good coach. Like obviously the recruiting part is like falling into place really well. And the fact that he's just been, groomed for this role for the past few years, helps. But my system sees him as a first-year head coach at a big-time program. And the track record isn't like terrible for those kind of cases, but it's not great. And so that like really dings the team, in addition to the fact that like their personnel is almost entirely turning over, and they weren't like super awesome last year. So that will play a role as well.
And that kind of gets to what I was going to ask you about. How do you look at freshmen? I was saying earlier, we touched on this a little bit. It must be so difficult. How do you look at a Derek Lively and a Dariq Whitehead and the such at Duke, and then go, oh, I can have some notion of how these guys are going to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's not terribly like intelligent. It looks at their recruiting ranking and applies that to the team and kind of applies it into a way that like helps like worse teams more. So like if a top recruit goes to like a lower ranked team, it'll improve their rating more than it will a better ranked team. But it's not super intelligent. Could be more intelligent in that sense. Could use AAU stats, grassroots stats. I think like Filipowski in particular like has like really good like grassroots stats, but I do not include those directly in my model. Like it would help in the margins, but wouldn't help a ton. So in general, it just sees, hey, Duke has like the best class in the country, and this is what they've done the last 4 years, and they have a new head coach, and puts kind of all that in the mix. And they don't really have anybody coming back from last year's team, so that all goes into the mix and spits out a rating. And in the case of Duke, it ends up being not very flattering. I should run it like with Coach K coming back and see what it would be, but anyway. Oh, it won't be very flattering, but really interesting. Yeah.
We would love to get the with Coach K and with arbitrary new head coach version of the rankings.
Yeah, maybe I'll get that ready for the release, because that could be interesting. Yeah, I think back when like Steve Prohm took over Iowa State like 6 or 7 years ago, and Iowa State was like pegged to be like a top 5 team that year, and I don't think they ended up being top 5 in the preseason. But I kind of look back at like new coaches that took over programs that were top 5 teams, like just like even Steve Prohm had previous experience, and it wasn't super flattering. Like there were only like 4 or 5 teams like in the last 20 years or so where you could say that, and like the results were like not terrible, like I said, but they weren't like the teams didn't live up to expectations. So that's part of what the algorithm is seeing.
We're all in a collective delusion right now about the Jon Scheyer thing, even though we all know how all the previous Duke assistant coaches have done in their stops after they've left Duke. We're all very aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, the key is, obviously they've all left Duke, and this is a little bit different. I mean, there's no reason to really doubt Jon Scheyer. Like, they're obviously part of what you see in that trend is that there's a little like there's Steve Prohm goes to Iowa State, like there is a little bit of discontinuity there. There's kind of a new regime coming in. And in this case, there's not a new regime coming in. There's about as much stability as you could have for a new coach. So in that sense, I could see why you would, bet that Duke would outperform the model. But people were saying that about Carolina last year. I had Carolina ranked horribly last year for the same reason. And for, up until
mid-February,
the middle of March. I mean, even after
you don't have to explain it. We know.
Right. I got you. But I mean, the point is like they weren't very good they were not a top 25 team for the regular season.
I was going to ask you more about John Shire, but you really covered it there. I have two other things I want to get to. First one is just really quickly, just like a geek kind of thing. Do you get excited when your metrics predict a score exactly right? I think it happens several times a year, right?
About 10 times a year. Yeah. I do get excited.
You typically tweet when it happens, don't you?
Well, I don't tweet it as much anymore because usually if somebody tweets it for me, I'll retweet it. That's basically how I roll now. I try not to toot my own horn. I'll let somebody else do it. Like there was the famous night last year where I there was a 28 game schedule and like the model predicted the correct winner for all 28 games, which I tweeted that out and said something like, yeah, tonight we solved college basketball, which is obviously like a totally ironic tweet and not meant to be taken seriously because first of all, like the model has a probability for every game. So actually like the chance of that happening is like extremely remote. Like that's the main reason to tweet it out is that actually this is like never going to happen again in my life. So I better tweet this out. But yes, I do get excited when the final score is predicted exactly because I don't think people understand like how impossible that is to do.
I love it. The other thing I think that people don't get when they look at your predictions, like, oh, Pomeroy says this team has a 55% chance to win. They're going to win. No.
Yeah.
Actually,
the worst part is when I have, a team favored in their next 10 games, right? And people will say, oh, Pomeroy expects them to go undefeated in their next 10 games. Like, this is great. And like, no, that's not what it's saying. And I never really know how to like convey that information on the site without making like the information infinitely more complex. So I just kind of leave it that way and hope that the people that say that get called out by somebody who understands how things work. But yeah, that's probably the most frustrating thing of how people use my predictions.
Would you like to issue a manifesto about data literacy on the internet just while we're on this? Yeah. I have my own thoughts about this, but I don't have any reputation for being, a connoisseur of this sort of thing. So if you want to give us that, we'd love it.
Yeah, I mean, I try not to be too hard on people because I understand that not everybody has my background and not everybody understands probabilities, and it is a challenge. So
that darn math is so complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like, oh, everybody's stupid. Like I'm trying to be like that. Like I get that people have different specialties and they don't quite understand it. But I would just hope that like people that are going to make definitive statements about my ratings would understand a little bit more about probability and how they work before they make those definitive statements. Because I feel like if you make a definitive statement, you should be correct about what you're saying, 99% of the time. If you want to hedge, that's fine. If you want to hedge, that, all bets are off. But if you're going to say like, Ken Pomeroy predicts this team to win its next 15 games at home, it's like, no, just do a little bit of research about that. Try to figure it out.
Ken, this has been fabulous. We're going to wrap up. We have a tradition here on the DBR podcast. Usually when we have a guest on who's connected to Duke, I ask them for a Coach K story, some story about how Coach K, motivated the team or something like that. And we've gotten some great ones over the years. Obviously, you're probably not going to have a Coach K story. Although if you do, please tell it now. But I was going to ask you, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier. Do you have a good story about an interaction with a coach, someone who really didn't understand things, or, just give me like your funniest, this coach doesn't get data story that you can think of.
Man, I thought we were going to go somewhere else with this.
You can use names if you want, but you don't have to use names.
I mean, I've had coaches call me and they don't understand the numbers and stuff like that. And I had like I guess I'll just give you this nugget because I had a current ACC coach call me in the off season. So you guys can just speculate as to who it is. You have a 1 in 15.
Sorry, current. So a current ACC coach.
Current ACC coach. This isn't that funny though, but it's just like, he was trying, it was a great conversation actually. And it was a great conversation. but he was trying to tell me like that Gonzaga like wasn't very good. And my system might, it's true. My system might overrate Gonzaga a little bit, but Gonzaga's been really good the last few years. I hate to tell you guys, but they've been easily one of the 5 best teams every single season, if not the best team. Like the best team doesn't always win the NCAA tournament. But he was trying to explain to me how Gonzaga wasn't very good. And I was coming back with like facts. I'd researched this and kind of told him, hey, Gonzaga has the best record against power conference teams the last 5 years, like of any team in the country, including power conference teams. So like, I think they've clearly like shown that they're pretty good. And he was just going back and forth with me and telling me, I don't know. Like, I don't know. They don't have to play, they don't have to play the grind of the ACC schedule every night. It's kind of going off about the ACC, which the ACC hasn't been that great the last few years. I hate to break it to you guys, but anyway, is that really that funny? That's not that funny, but let me give you one like Coach K related stat. Okay. This is where I can come through, I think. And I think this is something that's not talked about enough. Maybe you guys talk about this, but do you know what year was the worst year in Coach K's entire career for 2-point shooting? How well do you know Duke basketball?
2-point
worst
shooting
year for 2-point shooting.
His worst 2-point shooting team ever, including Army. Okay. We're including Army, but it did happen at Duke.
I'm going to take. I haven't looked at this. I'm not. You guys can see. I'm looking at the screen. I'm not looking at my other screen. I'm going to guess it's 2010, the year that Duke won the championship, only shooting 3-pointers.
Yes, that is the correct
and
answer.
Offensive rebounding.
Yes. And,
Let's go.
Yeah, 47. They were a 47% 2-point shooting team, which ranked 201st in the country, and was absolutely awful. And
then Lance Thomas went on to have the best NBA career of anybody on the team.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
if you think you can predict basketball, you're wrong.
Yep. It was just a really like oddball team, and just held up that, I mean, the ACC was actually, pretty good that season on a really good interior defensive league. So that like helped kind of suppress their 2-point shooting. But, they got into the tournament and they just like destroyed teams offensively for the most part, maybe until the title game. But, they were just really good offensively just by doing everything else great. Sucked at 2-point shooting. And when I talk to coaches, I tell them like, hey, you can usually like look at 2-point shooting. That's like a really good indicator of how good your team is, offensively and defensively. Like that's like not luck. Like that's, ingrained in how your team is. So like first 5-6 games into the season, look at that and you'll figure out like, are you good or not? And well, Duke, that was like an enormous exception. So that team will always like have a special place in my heart just for how they kind of defied expectations and kind of the national narrative that year.
God, this was a great conversation, Ken. Thanks so much. And by the way, I never got a chance to talk with you about it. Your program rankings, Duke is far and away. Your program rankings goes from 1997 to present, and Duke is far and away the top program in the Ken Pom era, if you want to call it that. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's not a gift, but it has to do with that consistency we're talking about, and like recent recruiting as well. So yeah, John Shire is inheriting the #1 program. So big responsibility there.
Well, like I was saying, we appreciate the way that you have educated all of us, both historically and today, about analytics and college basketball and the way to look at it. This was a real treat. And if you decide to run those numbers, Coach K versus John Shire, email me, baby. I think that'd be we find that fascinating. We'll have you back on
exclusive.
If you run that, we'll absolutely have you back on, no question about it. And you can tell the Duke fans what the expectations would be.
If you don't want to share it with us exclusively and just want to publish it yourself, at least give us the credit for having given you the idea.
All right. I'll do that. It's a deal.
Ken Pomeroy, thanks so much. Like I said at the beginning, we are subscribers to your website. Duke fans, if you want to be smarter about college basketball, it doesn't cost very much. Get a subscription to kenpom.com. And Ken, again, we just appreciate you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. Great conversation. Enjoyed it. And looking forward to seeing what Duke does during the season.
We'll be back in just a moment on the DBR podcast. We will react to that amazing conversation with Ken Pomeroy, and we bid farewell to one of the most important members of the Duke community, someone who actually never attended Duke University. That story when we come back. Guys, we're back from the break. I hope everyone took a moment during the break and just paused and digested what a really fascinating conversation that was with Ken Pomeroy. Sam, you're a guy who's really into data and analytics. I mean, wow. Was that fun or what?
Super fun. And I was a little bit nervous that I've never seen an interview with Ken Pomeroy. I read a few articles that quoted him before we did this to make sure I was up to date on all the info. And I got the detail wrong that he apparently is not working at Utah anymore, which is fine. But I was a little bit nervous that he was going to be like more ornery towards people who sort of don't understand what he's doing. And I can actually, when he referenced the fact that he doesn't snipe back at people, I was thinking about how his Twitter feed is actually more like sort of cheeky and fun than it is, angry. And there are other stats guys on the internet that I feel like get angrier at people for not being stats literate, but he's pretty accommodating of that. So all of that aside, very cool to hear the way that he sort of thinks about reading his own metrics throughout the season. And there's like a combination of humility, but also confidence in what he's doing. And I think he has like such a good mindset about the task that he basically has laid in front of himself. And now that like everyone in college basketball, players, coaches, fans, media, everyone is basically just following him. And he's got, sort of understated a lot of responsibility to sort of get things right or get things close to right, because everyone is reading him and everyone's listening to him.
That whole interview was terrific, but I still go back to like how, in a funny way, right? And in a good way, how uncomfortable he feels about the NCAA using his work in determining who the 68 teams are going to be in the NCAA tournament. I think that is, again, goes back to the humility perspective. Also, he kind of said, like in fewer words, kind of said the NCAA is a tire fire, and I don't want to be a part of that, right? I don't want to be associated with, why a team got into a tournament versus someone else. And I think, like for the listeners out there, like we could see, like you could feel how uncomfortable he was even talking about his criteria being included, or his ratings being included in the criteria for NCAA tournament selection. So I thought that was fascinating because, out of all of the, rating systems out there, his is, predominantly the best, right? Like we use it, we reference it often. We don't do that because we're playing favorites. We do that because it is the best. And the NCAA, in an effort to be better, has taken the best rating system and applied it to their criteria. And that person's just like, nah, man, I don't need y'all, messing my stuff up. Like, I thought that was fascinating, a fascinating look about just, how the NCAA just kind of takes. And at the end of the day, some of these rating systems, and I'm sure, we haven't talked to Sagarin or Torvik or any of the other ones, but, the fact that they're, just kind of, wanting to keep the NCAA at arm's length when their system is really dominating how we select the tournament is fascinating to me.
I agree with you, Donald. I loved sort of the humility there. I can't believe, like, we were joking around. He was like, yeah, if they ever asked me to be in the room, I don't want to be there. And I was like, are you crazy? But I love that humility from him. But then the other thing that I thought Duke fans need to, I hope folks listen to that entire interview to hear what he was saying about John Shire and about Duke this coming season with a first-time head coach. And yes, everything is set up so that Shire should be successful. But even with everything set up for Shire to be successful, he's a first-time head coach at a big-time program with, Ken talked about continuity in a positive way. There's actually, in terms of the players, very little continuity, almost no continuity. One significant player is back. Everyone else is pretty much new. No offense to Jalen Blakes. He played in practice last year and stuff, but and I think, Ken Pomeroy said when his rankings come out, you're going to see Duke's going to be lower than you would expect. Almost everyone else has Duke in the top 7 or 8 or so. And my bet is he's going to have us maybe barely top 15. But there's a good reason for that. And I think that's just an important thing for Duke fans to take away from all this.
Yeah, especially when we talk about, right, he kind of prided himself. If the one thing that he kind of expressed some pride on over his ratings is that they're very, there's a lot of continuity in his rankings. He doesn't tweak it a lot. He doesn't add things. He doesn't take things out. And he even doesn't want you to compare, years to years, because even with those little tweaks, he just like, hey, this is a new season, new rating system, but over the years is very consistent. With Duke, the continuity for the last 42 years was one man. Like, if you think about it, there's only one man who has been in part of all those Duke years, and that man is Coach K. So this year is the complete opposite of continuity. Everyone on the team is adding to, a stop in that continuity, because again, that one, continuous element of Duke basketball is no longer on the sidelines, at least as the head coach. So I think that's going to be interesting to see how that is reflected in the ratings this year for Duke. And just kind of, again, I don't think John Shire is one of these coaches that's going to be calling him like, yo, why aren't we going up a few points? But it's going to be interesting to see how that, those ticks up and down may come this year, as opposed to, again, the last, however many years that he's done this rating system. Because again, when you look back at the program ratings that he had, Duke was far and away the number one, as you said, Jason. And now that's taking a test, because they now have a new person being added to the continuity that is Duke University, that has been shaped in the most continuous, rating system there is.
All right, guys, before we go, I do want to get to something that is really significant. And I think a lot of Duke fans heard about this, but I want us to spend a moment on it. All the flags on the Duke University campus have been lowered this week because Janet Hill has died. And it would be really easy to say, oh yeah, she's Grant Hill's mom, and leave it at that. And that would be a crime. If you do not know about the life that Janet Hill led, go educate yourself. I mean, yeah, she birthed one of the greatest basketball players in Duke hoops history, but to merely make that her epitaph would be setting aside some really important, significant accomplishments. Duke did not lower the flag across the university this week because someone's mom died. They lowered it because Janet was on the Duke Board of Trustees. Janet was on the Board of Trustees for Sprint, for the publisher Houghton Mifflin, for Wendy's, for Progressive Insurance, and many other companies. She headed a consulting firm that advised companies on governance and planning for directors and boards and stuff. And she's widely considered one of the finest, if not the finest, board member in the entire business world. She's in all these Hall of Fames and stuff like that because of it. And everywhere she went, she pushed for diversity and inclusiveness. And I want to be clear about something. Back in 1981, Janet Hill co-founded a firm that started advising businesses that having a diverse workforce was a smart thing and was a path to success. 1981, diversity wasn't a very fashionable thing back then, but she continued to drive home the importance of that and the importance of having the right kind of board and the right kind of governance for companies for 4 decades. Like I said, she was a member of the Duke Board of Trustees from 2006 to 2021. That is a long time, folks. This is not just someone who impacted Duke basketball. This is someone who impacted the entire university. If you care about Duke, then you should care about this tragic passing. This fall, Janet Hill was due to receive Duke's Medal of Distinguished Meritorious Service, which is the highest honor that Duke can give out to anyone. Sadly, it will be bestowed upon her posthumously. And I just wanted us to take a moment to acknowledge a really, really important member of our community.
Yeah. I was floored when I heard this news the other night. I think I shared it with you guys, like right as we found out, right as we went to, basically everyone on the East Coast was about to go to bed. And, I met Janet Hill several times during the years in my roles with Duke alumni, here in DC, on campus. She was very, very involved with Duke alumni efforts. As the saying goes, Duke is one of the few universities where we treat parents the same way as we do students. And she took that to another level. Like you said, Jason, she was on the Board of Trustees as a parent. Like when I say as a parent, I don't mean that in, just because she happens to be the parent of Grant Hill, but because she took that role and embraced it so well. She was on the Board of Trustees for 16 years. Very few people stay on a Board of Trustees at any university for that long, but she's so beloved on campus in the alumni efforts on campus in athletics. She had her hand in just about everything. And it even goes back to when she was in college. She was a classmate of Hillary Clinton And Hillary Clinton's like, yo, Janet Hill got me through school. Like that, those words don't come, just, they don't come easily. Those are words that mean something. And, every time, the most important thing, every time you saw her, she remembered your name. She was warm. She was welcoming. She was inviting. She would ask about, how your work is going, how your career is going, how she could help. She did that to me on several occasions. And every single time it blew me away because I'm like, yeah, I've met you like 4 or 5 times. But every single time she would catch up on a conversation that you had with her previously. She had that kind of mind. So this is a huge blow. To Duke University is a huge blow to the world, really. But for us as Duke people, she was Duke. She was, absolutely 100% a part of this campus and a part of this world that we're in. So I'm really sad about this news. And I think I speak for all of us when I say our hearts go out to, Grant, Calvin, the entire Hill family, and to everyone at Duke who knew her, because there's a lot of people here who feel the same pain. And I think that the world is a little dimmer today because of that.
My mom served on a board with Janet Hill in the DC area for a number of years, and would tell me periodically about how cool it was to get to work with her and interact with her. And I don't know, maybe this is just like my nature. I like to poo-poo my mother a little bit and rag on her from time to time. And I'd be like, oh, I'm sure that Janet Hill is your friend. But it was actually one of the people that my mom was like most excited to get to talk about. And so when I heard the news the other day, I never met Janet Hill, certainly read about her and know a lot about her, but I was immediately like, I have to talk to my mom about this. And I'm sure that there are tons of other people who had a similar reaction, just because I didn't know her, someone close to me, especially if you're in the Duke community, someone close to me knows her and knew her very well. So incredibly tragic. She was not that old and was dealing with pretty horrible illness, which is, I think, what caused her passing. But
brain cancer.
Same. Yeah. What Donald was saying, our thoughts are obviously with the whole family and the whole community at Duke, in Washington, sort of all over the place where Janet Hill has had an impact.
To bring it back to Duke basketball at the end, the story goes, and I've never been able to ask Grant. I've never heard if this story was necessarily true, but the story goes that Grant Hill really just wanted, when he was in high school, really wanted to commit to Georgetown. Like he was like, yeah, that's where I'm going. And that Janet was the one who said, no, you're going to go look around at other schools. And I especially want you to go look at Duke. She was the one who really encouraged him to go down and look at Duke. Now she says, at least I've heard, that Grant got to make the ultimate decision. But Grant would have apparently picked Georgetown if he'd had his way, until his mother said, go have a look. And there's a friend of mine who this week said she's the single most important person who was never on the Duke staff and never played for Duke in Duke basketball history, because having Grant Hill at Duke changed the course of our program.
Jason, there is an alternate history about Grant Hill's recruitment at Georgetown. I don't know if we've ever told the story on the podcast, and it may be like borderline libelous to share it. Do you guys know the story?
Oh, yeah. About? No, go ahead. It's not libelous because it's out there. Go ahead.
I don't know if it's accurate because I don't know like who reported it, but there is the version of the story that Grant Hill, who was a very good student in high school and then proceeded to be a very good student in college, in addition to being a standout basketball player, that Georgetown was not super high on academic standards for the basketball recruits when he was in high school, and that the academic advisor for the program had a one-on-one meeting with him, like during an official visit, where they asked him to just like read a book or something. And so Grant Hill like took the book and started reading it to himself, like confused as to why that was happening. And the guy said, no, can you read it out loud? Like, just to make sure that I know you can read. And Grant Hill was like, I'm out of here. Like, I think that's, tell me if you guys know a different version of that story. But that's basically the story. So I don't know, maybe Janet Hill was in the room as well. It was like, okay, maybe we need to check out other schools.
It's more of an urban legend, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
In a sense, right? Like I've definitely heard that version of the story. Is it true or not? Who knows? I think that'll be probably something that'll never come to light. in public or be confirmed. But the funny thing is that story about Janet telling him, because remember, he grew up in this area, in the DC area. And even though, Cal played for the Cowboys, he grew up here, and Georgetown's kind of the home school, right? Like the DC school. So it sounds like someone that I know, my mom, who's like, maybe you should, school's fine, but kind of explore your horizons, get out for college, see the world, go to, dude, that sounds cool. That sounds like a nice place to live. But yeah, it's when you told that story, Jason, that kind of sparked a memory of again, the story that I have with my mom when she was basically like, we're going to explore other options and see if you like it.
In any event, again, as Donald said, our sympathies, our feelings, our emotions go out to the entire Hill family and the Duke family, because this is a loss for all of us. That's going to do it for us here on episode 438 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. For Donald and Sam, I am Jason. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget, like and subscribe. Don't forget, send us email, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. That's the email address. I think that we continue to commit to respond to every email we get and at least let you know that we heard from you. If not, get into a long conversation with you, which happens far too often and sucks up way too much of our time. But that's how it goes. Again, for Donald and Sam, I'm Jason. Our thanks again to Ken Pomeroy for one of the best, most interesting, geeky interviews we've ever had here on the show. We hope you will continue to tune in and listen to us. Here is the Duke Band. Play us out and take us home.
Hello, guys.
Hey there, Ken.
Hello.
All right, I'm geeking out, man. I got to tell you, do people do that? Do people meet you and just go, "Oh my God, it's Ken Pomeroy"?
There's about like 1% of people that do that, and like 99% of people are just like, "Who is this guy?" Like,
Well,
we are in the 1%, my friend.
I was gonna say we are the
All
1%.
right.
So
Yeah,
love it.
how do I sound?
Great.
Fine.
Yeah.
New location today. I'm in our Chicago office. So
Oh,
but I
that's
brought
cool.
I brought my microphone with me.
Very smart. And you have a nice looking drink there.
Yep. It's a nice coffee that one of my colleagues just brought me.
I was gonna say, is it an iced latte?
he's sitting. One of my coworkers thought this was cool. He's sitting in here and he's shaking his head at me. He may be my direct report getting me coffee. He might be. So
That's impressive.
I might be abusing the underlings.
Oh, when you said direct report, I thought you meant you report to him.
No. He
Yeah.
reports to me.
In that case, there's nothing impressive about it.
I was like, I definitely would not just like go make him get me coffee. He was like, oh, I'm going to get coffee. What's going on? I was like, oh, actually, yeah. And while I'm doing the show.
I mean, when you said direct report, I was gonna be like, Sam, we have an English word for that. It's called boss. Like
Yeah.
boss.
Yeah.
I'm his boss.
Yeah.